All right, all right, all right. All right, all right, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Everybody right now, text your friends and tell them to come back into the general session. My name is Kendra Roberts, and I am the VP of Operations for Human Good Affordable Housing, and I am the first Vice Chair for the Housing California Board of Directors, and I'm excited to be with you all this afternoon. Before we dive into this afternoon's session, we want to go over a few housekeeping items. We look forward to seeing you at the welcome reception, generously sponsored by Dimensions Renewable Energy, starting at 5 p.m. at the Terrace Theater Plaza. Your complimentary drink ticket is on your name badge. Also, for the first time since 2019, we are bringing back Housers After Dark, sponsored by Icon National. You are welcome to join at Shannon's at the top, starting at 9 p.m. for this additional reception. The first 300 people will receive a complimentary drink ticket. Now, I'd like to invite Ari Belak, President and CEO of Merit Community Capital Corporation, and one of our title sponsors to the stage to provide a few remarks and introduce this afternoon's session. We are grateful for Merit's title sponsorship, tremendous support of Housing California, and generous contribution to our Engaging Leaders Scholarship Fund. Thank you again, and I look forward to engaging in this session with all of you.
Thank you, Kendra, for that introduction, and for Human Good for being such a great partner over the many years together. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ari Belak. I'm the President and CEO of Merit Community Capital. At Merit, we believe everyone in California should have a home and a community where they can thrive, which is why we invest in affordable housing and people to build a stronger California. For 35 years, you have known us as your trusted investor, working on many of your most difficult projects, and together, we have created over 11,000 homes with 30,000 Californians now living in them. Oh, thank you. Recently, you've also seen Merit dramatically increase our investment in people with our Commitment to California initiative. This initiative is focused on attracting, training, and retaining the next generation of affordable housing practitioners with a goal of making the industry more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And thank you. And Commitment to California is a holistic program supporting the broad needs that we have here in this cause. We have programs supporting finance and development, property management, asset management, public policy, as well as advocacy. Some of the best-known components of our program are the Merit Scholars Program. This is a $10,000 scholarship and mentorship program for undergraduate and graduate students. We have 20 of those Merit Scholars here today, and thank you. And if you know any undergraduate or graduate students interested in a $10,000 scholarship and mentorship, you can go out to our table. The program application closes on April 15th. We also fund great programs like LISC's HTTI program. I know many of you are graduates of that program. And we recently launched a program supporting asset managers within the affordable housing industry in California. We have 25 people going through that program. And of course, we support Housing California's Emerging Leaders program, NPH's program, CCRH, as well as the California Housing Partnership and the San Diego Housing Federation. In fact, in 2023, over 500 people went through these programs in California. But investing in affordable housing and people is necessary but not sufficient to meet our goals. And that's why we are delving headfirst in supporting the policies that we need to support affordable housing in this state. Thank you. So for the first time, Merit's providing substantial support, financial support, for the policies that we need here in supporting ACA 1, the voter initiative threshold, the BAFA campaigning, Bethany Wicks bond, and all the other campaigns that we need to provide resources into the affordable housing industry. And so we are proud to introduce this afternoon's plenary, which is focused on policy, more specifically on the policy to create the resources that we need to address our affordable housing crisis. So there's 2,200 people at this conference, we need you to grab your friends, your neighbors, your acquaintances, and really everyone that you know to marshal the resources that we need to address this crisis. In 2021, Housing California, in collaboration with the California Housing Partnership, launched Roadmap Home 2030. I'm sure many of you have read it many times. It's one of my favorite reads. It is. It really is. It's great. You should look at it. All right. So it's a bold, long-term plan to create the future that we want for California by building affordable homes, protecting low-income renters, ending homelessness, and advancing racial equity and economic inclusion. So to meet these goals, we need only about $18 billion per year to get there. $18 billion a year, that should be easy. And so today we're going to have an opportunity to talk about how to get that $18 billion and how the great housing leaders who are coming up here are leaning into this window of opportunity to build momentum, to engage the public as they lead efforts to secure and direct billions of new public funding to advance housing justice during the November 2024 election campaign. So I'm really excited for this session, and without any more ado, I'd like to introduce up here Dr. Jennifer Martinez to the stage. Woo. Dr. Jennifer Martinez is the Policy Director for Housing Affordability at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Prior to joining CZI, Jennifer was a community organizer for 17 years and worked on campaigns for housing justice, immigrant rights, restorative justice, and quality education. Jennifer will be moderating this afternoon's conversation. Thank you.
Well, Ari really threw down the gauntlet, $18 billion, friends. So I know we stand between you and happy hour, and you've been hearing a lot of folks talk at you all day today. Hopefully you've gotten some good conversations in. And I think this one is going to be another spicy conversation. So I'm going to invite my colleagues and friends up. This is a group that is leading at the cutting edge of, wait for it, tax reform, revenue, policy change. And if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. So I'd like to invite Amy Fishman, Executive Director of Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California. Sabrina Smith, CEO of California Calls, one of the largest grassroots voter engagement efforts in the country. Alicia Sebastian, Executive Director for the California Coalition for Rural Housing. And Isela Gracian, the Senior Deputy for Homelessness and Housing for LA Supervisor Holly Mitchell. Do we have a hot mic on? All right, ladies, are we gonna spice it up for everyone? Yeah. So we know that $18 billion is needed for the state of California. And we're interested in hearing from you all what you see as some of the biggest barriers to securing that kind of funding, and how you and the organizations that you lead are working to overcome them. So Alicia, can I start with you?
Sure, yeah. As Jennifer mentioned, I am Alicia Fleming Sebastian. I am the Executive Director of the California Coalition for Rural Housing as of about a month ago. The California Coalition for Rural Housing is one of the oldest affordable housing advocacy organizations in the United States. Our membership is predominantly nonprofit developers and other partners who have a majority or significant footprint in our rural communities, agricultural communities, and American Indian tribal communities. Should I continue, or are you gonna?
Yeah,
all right,
I'd like
I'll go
to hear
ahead.
how you're addressing this challenge.
Yeah, so, well, one of the ways that CCRH works to really generate resources is through both the budget, the legislative, and regulatory processes, and we're really focused on developing funding sources for these specific community needs. And short of having robust state resources, many of these communities are at a loss without these dollars. And if we don't secure a permanent source of funding, we're going to have to continue to come back time and time again for a bond in these places. And we run into some challenges in our rural communities when we're not really engaging our folks in helping them understand that housing is a solution for their community, and that housing is something that can be seen in terms of economic development. It can be seen as a way to really bring control and choice into communities, and those are the kinds of messages that really work to move the needle with our members.
Thank you. Amy, I know you've been at this for many, many years. What's the kind of work that you're up to now to secure the $18 billion that our state needs?
Well, first, I just want to say how awesome it is to be up here with this all-women panel. And women leadership is rocking it. We love everybody else too, but I just want to say that it's great to be here and such an honor to be with such wonderful people and wonderful leaders. What I want to say, what I want to talk about is something that we've been building for a long time, and it's very exciting. We're at a very exciting moment because we have the opportunity to win at the ballot at the state level a constitutional amendment to lower the voter threshold for local affordable housing bond measures. Now, what would that do if we're able to do that? It would unlock billions of dollars in local funding all across the state. It would provide local tools for local jurisdictions to meet their affordable housing and homelessness needs. It would be like a replacement of redevelopment dollars, that the first in foundational dollars that unlock the pipeline and get projects moving to be able to leverage other funds. So this is a big part of what we're trying to do with this state constitutional amendment for the November 2024 ballot.
Amazing. So that's what's happening this year in 2024 at the state level. Sabrina, I know you've been working on something for many years as well. I think we met each other 10 years ago on this very topic. And so could you tell us a little bit about what your organization has been up to bring $18 billion into our communities?
Sure. So again, my name is Sabrina Smith. I'm the CEO of California Calls. We're an alliance of grassroots community-based organizations that came together 14 years ago, really to center the voices of people most impacted by poverty and oppression in policymaking. And we do this by building power and expanding the electorate. And so for a North Star for our alliance has been to tackle the third rail of California politics and reform Proposition 13, which passed in 1978.
Yes.
More claps.
Thank you. You can clap for that. That's okay.
It's been a huge driver of disinvestment. Over $500 billion have been lost to schools and local communities since this initiative passed. Our focus is really on reforming, pushing for split roles. So assessing commercial properties, not touching the homeowner side, but assessing commercial properties at fair market value. Now we're leaving $18 billion on the table. If we assess commercial properties at fair market value every year, that's the money we could recoup. It also launched an anti-tax, anti-government movement that swept across the country for the past almost 5 decades, and we're seeing the consequences of this not only statewide but also nationally, and it has really poisoned people's public perception about the role of government and the role of taxes. And so we actually brought this to the ballot in 2020. We narrowly lost. It was Prop 15, Schools and Communities First. We lost by 670,000 votes out of 17.1 million cast, so we were so close, and we intend to bring it back to the ballot in the future.
Whew, okay. And Gisela, I know you've also been working on something in LA County. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm Gisela Gracian, and I am Senior Deputy on Housing, Homelessness, and Planning for LA County Board Supervisor Holly Mitchell. For those of you that are not from LA, and maybe those of you who are from LA, we have 10 million people here in the county, 88 cities, and about 1 million of those 10 million people are in unincorporated areas. So at the Board of Supervisors in our district, we have about 2 million people. And for the unincorporated areas, we are also their local city government, or the quasi-city council for them. And in our region, each, as well as in other counties, the cities get to focus on their housing, and in many cases they don't. So here in LA County, a coalition of advocates worked to get a state bill passed for us to be able to have the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, which we started in April. And I have the honor and the fortune of staffing my boss, who's the chair of, we call it La Casa. And through La Casa, we're really working to harness government funding. There's signatures being gathered right now for an initiative for November also that will continue, if passed, funding for our homelessness services as well as funding for La Casa. And we are poised to be able to have over $400 million for housing preservation, production, as well as protections for tenants through that initiative. So we're really excited about that possibility and doing it really where we can bring the region together and encourage more of our 88 cities to really focus on the housing production and preservation.
Thank you. As you can see, this panel is really representing the multiple dimensions that are going to be required in order to build the $18 billion that our state needs on an annual basis for affordable housing. We've got folks working at the local level with financing innovations. We've got this coming ballot initiative, several ballot proposals on this year's election, and then we've got a long-term systemic transformation game plan in terms of reforming Prop 13. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into each of these solutions because it's not just this idea of the solution, it's also how do we win them. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that on this panel as well. So Amy, I want to start with you because this is 2024. Everyone has been talking about ACA 1. And so how are you thinking about how we're going to build the necessary campaign that's going to help us win that initiative in this year's election?
Great. It's a great question, and it involves all of you. So this is a participatory project, it's an organizing project, and it's a campaign. The good news is that we are already on the ballot. We were placed on the ballot by a supermajority of the legislature in September, and the project now is to amend it, to fix it so that it's ready to win in November. It needs to be strong and durable. But we are in great shape because we are, in fact, on the ballot. We are in motion with this campaign. We have raised over $15 million. We have built and are continuing to build a Big Tent coalition and grassroots organizing because that's what it's going to take to win. So we need strong policy, a great coalition, a lot of money to win. We need to minimize opposition and minimize particularly funded opposition. And if all these pieces come together, we can see transformative change. It's sort of on the road to longer-term transformative change, but it will be long-term structural reform with this rule change built into the state constitution that gives local communities the tools that we need. And an example of what we're also moving simultaneously is the sister agency to La Casa, which is the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. Give it up for BAFA, folks. It's like one of the best acronyms in housing, BAFA. So in any case, we're moving a 9-county regional affordable housing bond measure, also for the November ballot. It's going to be $10 to $20 billion, and it relies on the state constitutional amendment ACA 1 to pass so that we can pass the regional measure with that lower voter threshold. So that's the big project. Super ambitious, super bold, and exciting, but it's what we need, and we're only going to get there if everybody gets involved. And I'll say later about what everybody can do.
Okay, we'll wait for that on pins and needles. Alicia, let's come back to you and talk a little bit, if you could just share a little bit more about what it's going to take to build the kind of capacity in order to pass the revenue that you're talking about in the rural and tribal communities where you work.
Thank you. I will get to that, but I have to kind of describe the situation in our rural communities and what these resources are so critical for. And when we're really faced with these challenging financial situations that we find ourselves in California from time to time, apparently, we really need to focus on equity that takes into account geography, historic underinvestment, reparations, and scale in order to meet the needs of these rural communities. And I also want to point out that we do have a housing crisis in rural California. We have gentrification and displacement like many communities, especially after the rise of Zoom towns and during the pandemic. And we also have increasing rates of homelessness, and some studies are showing that there are higher rates per capita in rural areas than the rest of the state. Additionally, the issues that rural communities are facing are reliant on these state and federal funds. There's a lack of capital at the local level in many of our rural communities. There's a lack of a tax base. There's a lack of a political will to tax themselves, and there's not as much philanthropic engagement in these spaces. So the role of federal and state dollars are disproportionately impactful in the most needed communities, these agricultural, rural, and tribal spaces. And really to kind of underscore that, I really look at also the ability to scale some of these projects and these issues. We don't necessarily need 200 units of permanent supportive housing in all of our rural places. And sometimes to make these projects pencil, that's what it might take. And we need to be able to scale to smaller sizes. We need to also have different housing types in our rural spaces. We need to be able to accommodate intergenerational families. It's not just the studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms in all of the California communities, and those aren't always going to be the solution. And a big part of that also is looking at the role of climate change and natural disaster and its disproportionate impact in our rural spaces. So climate change and environmental racism is stronger in our agricultural spaces. We have rural communities on literally the barrier between wild land and communities, and we've seen that impact in terms of fire and flooding. And we have American Indian tribal communities sort of fighting to be able to steward their land and do the climate mitigation that they've been doing for thousands of years. And so these issues can really only be solved by state and federal resources. We need those dollars for these communities more than anywhere else. And only a thing like a bond or some of the solutions we're talking about here are going to be the thing that can actually solve those challenges. And what we find that works in mobilizing people to get to the ballot is kind of basic stuff, right? Start with where they are, talk about the things that are important. Again, rural areas, we're talking home ownership opportunities for the next generation, aging in community, aging in place. And in order to do that, and what we've found hasn't always worked in the past, is we need specific materials, we need narratives, stories, we need images that look and feel like our communities and really speak to these rural realities. And that's exactly where CCRH and all our partners are heading together.
That's great. Isela, coming back to the local experience of working on passing revenue and building a new financing agency, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what you're learning about this process and what challenges you're faced with in trying to raise new revenues for this new agency.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning a lot. This is, for those of you that know me, my first time in government, and previously on the other side of the table doing organizing and development work in the East Side. So it's great to be in space with everybody here once again. And I think one of the big pieces that I would highlight here is that we were able to set up La Casa and get the state bill passed because of the, our Future LA Coalition and the work of advocates, and really engaging also with elected officials in this current time. You know, we're in this space where we have, like, my boss, Supervisor Mitchell, other people in the city of Los Angeles, here in Long Beach with Mayor Rex Richardson, that really understand and are behind the issues of housing and what it takes to get production going, and being able to really engage and figure out a new way of working together, a different way of working together, to ensure that, because of the space I'm coming out of, I'm going to use this word, a new machine needs to get set up on how we in government and folks in the advocacy space and the practitioners are really coming together to, one, be sharing what the challenges are, but I'm going to borrow from a speaker in the earlier plenary, of really imagining a space where we have achieved the solution, one of the challenges is that we continue to operate in a space of status quo, of how things are working, and just what are the small tweaks that need to be made to continue that. So for us to really evolve and advance in securing the dollars and being able to convince a broader stakeholder, broader residents to be with us on the solutions, right? Press is really quick to pick up on the challenges. People know that we have a homelessness crisis. People know that we have a housing crisis. But the constant question we get, what are the solutions, right? Or that the solutions are not working. But everybody here, there's a lot of people out in the audience, everybody here and those that are not here are working on solutions that work. They all work together. We need the diversity of housing, the diversity of tactics, the diversity of strategies, and we need to be able to come together to support having that diversity and being able to talk about it in a way where we're not dismissing or downplaying another tactic because we're trying to get ours funded, but being able to bring it all together. So in this work and where we're at in LA County and with La Casa and being able to get the dollars that we need and get our cities together, they need to see themselves and they need to be able to see that all these different strategies around protecting tenants, around preserving existing housing, around having different models of ownership, whether it's community land trusts, cooperatives, continue to having low-income housing tax credit projects, LIHTC, having projects that don't have LIHTC, having all these different models is what we need to be able to get to the scale that we have. So our challenge, and one of the challenges we have, is really convincing all the decision makers that there's not just one solution and one tactic, that we need the diversity that's represented here in this room, from developers to architects to advocates. We need everybody's strategies to meet the needs of the different population that we have in LA County across the state.
Can I just build on that? Because I feel like Isela brings up such an important point, as does Alicia, in terms of both the stories and people seeing themselves in the solutions, and then also disrupting some of the fragmentation or essentializing, right, like the right solutions. What we learned from the Schools and Communities First fight is that we have to build a bigger tent. No one organization can build and win structural reform alone, that it takes a broad tent that unites diverse sectors, diverse communities. We took 5 years to build the coalition before we were ready to take Prop 13 reform to the ballot. It was one of the largest coalitions backing a ballot initiative in California's history, with 1,800 endorsers. We had elected officials, we had tenant justice, we had racial justice organizations, we had young folks, we had elders. I mean, it was a huge, broad coalition. I think that is a key piece of crafting solutions where people can see themselves, and the nature of the tax and fiscal, our broken tax and fiscal structure actually fuels some of that fragmentation. So in times of austerity, we're facing a $72 billion state budget deficit, right? Folks retrench to protect their piece of the pie. And so building those big tents, building those broad coalitions, and really aligning and uniting and shaping around a multitude of solutions, I think is key if we want to see transformational change.
I really appreciate that, and I think you all represent examples of how that is happening across the state. And I know we heard this morning as well, this idea that we need to bring in educators and healthcare folks and people who know and understand that their work is dependent on everyone having a safe, affordable home for them to also see success in what they're trying to achieve. And yet there are many forces that are working in hard opposition to the kinds of solutions that you all are bringing to the table. Sabrina, I'm wondering if you could help lay out what some of those forces are that are alive and well even now.
Yes, so they're actually, I think one of the silver linings that I take away with is that the movements for social, racial, climate, housing justice in California over the last 30 years, we've made tremendous progress that we're now facing intense backlash. In some ways, it reminds me, I was an organizer in the 1990s. recently young folks told me that it's now called the 1900s. But those of you who were not born in the 90s or later will remember that we faced an onslaught of attacks really to the gains of the civil rights movement. I was a student at UCLA. We were beginning to feel the consequences of Prop 13 reform. We were facing dramatic fee hikes when UC education used to be free. The beginning of Ward Connerly's assault on affirmative action, a 30-year campaign which just was codified by the Supreme Court, began in the UCs. And we saw all of these ballot measures attacking immigrants, LGBT community, workers, 3 strikes, all of this, and we lost many of them. And so in some ways, this moment feels similar, where we're seeing at least 3 defensive fights that have qualified, possibly 4, on climate, on criminal justice, on tax policy, and economic justice. The one that we're most concerned about is what we're calling the Taxpayer Deception Act. One of the sneaky things that anti-tax forces have done is actually baked into state law, into the state constitution, these rule changes that prevent us from raising the revenue for housing, for the safety net for schools, and so we have to go to the ballot to change the state constitution. It also requires a 2/3 supermajority of the legislature to raise taxes. So this is why it's so hard to raise revenue in the state. This is another attempt to bake in rules and make it nearly impossible to raise revenue. It's backed by the California Business Roundtable, the California Business Property Association, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, right? These California Business Roundtable purports to be an innocuous business association, but it's really the big oil who's attempting to block climate change. It's global real estate companies that are fueling the housing crisis, like Blackstone, Kilroy, Douglas Emmett. It's also GOP donors like Jeffrey Palmer. Those of you in LA may know he's one of the worst luxury landlords who's very close to the former president. The chair of the Business Roundtable is known as the dean of the Orange County GOP. And so these are forces that want to protect the status quo, that don't want to see change, that don't want to envision a new future in a California for all. The measure would make it nearly impossible to raise taxes both statewide and locally. So it expands the definition of taxes. It would require a vote on all taxes. It would require a 2/3 supermajority at the local level. So just the opposite of what ACA is trying to do. And it's retroactive. It'll nullify over 100 tax measures that have passed since January 1st, 2022. This was sparked by the passage of United to House LA. Anyone in LA work on that campaign? ULA is the mansion tax. It's raising already $172 million for affordable housing and tenant protections. Anybody who watches Selling Sunset, you'll know that these luxury real estate agents who are selling $22 million homes are boohooing about their clients having to pay taxes on those very expensive mansions in Los Angeles. That was actually the trigger and the impetus for this, and so that will also be nullified. So this is a huge threat and something that we have to come together to defeat in November.
Whew, okay, yeah. Yeah, we all got to get back behind this, or against it, or
Yes.
with Sabrina. Follow Sabrina. She's going to lead us all. So I do want to get into this question of, so we have these great ideas on the table. We've got statewide opportunities. We've got local opportunities. You didn't fully mention it, but there is an opportunity to raise revenue for La Casa that is also collecting signatures. If you haven't signed and you're in LA County, sign that ballot or the signature. And yet there are these sectoral issues, there's geographic issues, and I think we agree on this panel that the way we're going to break through is by bringing everyone along together. We need that bigger tent. That's why we wanted to bring a panel like this up to the stage. And I've got to say, at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, we have the wonderful opportunity of supporting the work that all of these organizations and leaders are doing, and to watch them do it with such diligence for long-term, years and years and years of work, to do it together across differences, across sectors, across geographies, across scale, is an impressive feat. how are we going to translate that to the voters? How are the voters, like we're excited, I'm excited. I hope you all are excited. I'm not hearing you be excited though, so anyone excited out there for what's happening? Okay. But we know voters are feeling a lot of other things. They're not necessarily feeling excitement. And yet they're the ones at the end of the day for the things that we need because of the way we have to raise revenue in this state. We have to go to them and ask them to be partners with us in passing these kinds of initiatives. So Amy, I'm curious about how you're thinking about that in, with ACA 1 and the Bay Area Initiative. What are you seeing happening with voters? And how is what you are doing in the Bay Area and statewide changing the tenor of how voters understand these solutions?
Thank you so much for that question. And I want to answer it by giving a little bit of context and tell a story. And it'll take people back to right after the loss of redevelopment, the federal dollars had dried up, state resources were exhausted. It was in 2015 when I started at NPH, the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California, sister organization to CCRH. And NPH members came to me and said, we got to figure out what to do. We're not finding a breakthrough solution around revenue. We're not able to move pipelines. And at the time, we said, we're going to go to the ballot. We're going to get ready. We're going to build out a regional electoral strategy. We're going to look at all 9 counties in the Bay Area and see what's going to be possible for the November 2016 ballot, another presidential. And you look at presidential ballots because that's the most progressive electorate, is when most people turn out. And we're going to see what we can do. And there was a lot of things that happened on the November 2016 ballot. Some of them for our country were pretty damn devastating. But locally, we had some major wins. We won billions of dollars in one election cycle. And that gave us momentum. It got the attention of elected officials because we did have to win those with a 2/3 supermajority. And we continued, and we were able to break through with legislative solutions in 2017. We were back to the ballot in 2018, more breakthrough solutions in the legislature in 2019, and then boom, COVID hit, and it interrupted that cycle that we were on. But what we're seeing with that is that there is this possibility to engage and mobilize voters. We also saw that we've had some pretty painful losses. We had ballot measures that lost with 64% of the vote, 58% of the vote. And in any other situation, that's considered an electoral landslide. But in the affordable housing bond world, it's a loss if you don't get 66.67%. So once we started seeing those painful losses, we knew that we had to change the rules. And so we've been building towards this moment. So where are voters? How do we get voters to go along? If we focus on something that's very technical and a rule change, if we focus on voter thresholds and funding, we're not going to move people. So what do we know that moves people? Stories, seeing themselves in whatever the solution is, real solutions to real problems that people experience every day. And right now, voters are feeling pretty darn cranky. They're feeling, it's like sort of a delayed reaction to all of the turmoil of the last few years, and they're not feeling that hopeful about solutions that the government can solve our problems. They're not seeing changes in our streets, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And so our job, our task every day is to bring hopeful solutions before people, before communities, and before voters. We have to reignite that sense that we can collectively solve the problems that we all know and recognize. And I want to give you a few polling numbers to show you where people are. So 71% of likely voters support building new housing in their community. 71% of likely voters agree that government has a responsibility to ensure that people have access to housing that is affordable. 70% of likely voters support making it easier to pass local affordable housing bonds if they have strict accountability and oversight. So what do we know from these numbers? Voters continue to deeply care about affordable housing and homeless solutions. It's top of the mind for voters, but they're nervous and skeptical. And that's where we have to bring accountability and oversight, all those things that give people confidence, but we also have to inspire people through narrative strategies, through messaging, and we're doing all of these things building up over time. We've learned a lot about voters and what they think and believe, and now's the time to get activated. And so our effort at the state level is to lower the voter threshold to 55%, the same as for school bonds. And there's a track record for that. So in the year 2000, Prop 39 lowered the voter threshold for school bonds from the supermajority to 55%. So this is a way where we're also aligning forces. We want to be like, schools, you need schools in your community, of course, and you actually need the fundamental thing where people need to thrive, which is homes that they can afford, homes that feel safe, homes where they can connect with their neighbors and their communities. So this is a little bit about like how we turn crankiness and skepticism and tax sensitivity. It's not everybody, but it's just the swing in the middle. It's like we just need that portion of the electorate that's feeling nervous to feel like this is going to make the difference. This is going to be a breakthrough solution, and that there's hope for this kind of change.
Ooh, thank you. Alicia, I'd like to turn to you. I know that one of the things we hear at the national level is this rural-urban divide conversation. And we don't maybe talk about it as much in California and certainly the national picture doesn't think of us as a rural and urban place, but we are deeply. And I'm curious if you could share with us a little bit more about how you think about how to be successful in moving revenue opportunities in rural communities and how we might bridge that rural-urban divide and help people see that we do, in fact, have a shared future together.
Yeah, thank you. As Amy was kind of talking about, like those voters who are skeptical, who don't necessarily trust that the solutions that are coming out of Sacramento, for example, are really going to move the needle in their communities because they're not seeing the solutions they need in some of the ways that we're presenting it. They want to know that the funding is going to go to the housing types that they need. They want to know that there's opportunities, like I said, for home ownership or for rehab on existing homes where we have older adults and living in really old housing stock in our rural spaces. They need to know that it's going to be a program that, as an American Indian tribe, California has 110 federally recognized tribes, more than any other state. And their access to these funding sources is still really challenging. We're still problem solving through that. So these are the communities that need to know that whatever solutions we're moving are going to take into account their needs. Things like infrastructure. We need to know that there's going to be targeted funding for the rural development challenges. Infrastructure, I cannot say infrastructure any louder. And so the way that we've seen this work though, and I'll never forget this, I was very early, maybe 2015, 2016, doing technical assistance with one of our rural communities in the San Joaquin Valley, very small. And we were looking at a cap and trade project, and we had to go to HCD and the Strategic Growth Council, and we had to ask, are these funds eligible for paving a road? And they looked at us like we were bonkers. Like, this is an infill program, this is an infill site. And I said, oh yeah. This is a dirt road that runs parallel to Main Street, right downtown. This has just not been paved, and we just need to know, can we use these sources to connect those streets? And they were like, we didn't know that, but yes, you can. And that's what these communities need to see. They need to know that California sees these communities, that our urban partners are partners with us, and that whatever we're creating is going to take these folks into account, and that they're going to see themselves and their solutions in this space. And the 2/3 piece is also going to be really critical, especially for the communities we're working in that are these kind of like purple counties or these kind of swing counties. We really think that this 2/3 is going to get our folks, the folks we have mobilizing at the table, really to have the impact that we know that these rural communities can have at the state level when we can make some of these changes.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Bring the energy. Thank you so much. Yeah. Isela, you mentioned the Our Future Coalition, Our Future LA Coalition, the La Casa work that you've done, working on the 3P solutions, producing, preserving, and protecting.
How are you thinking about this all of the above approach and the opportunities to build the solidarity across the different kinds of communities that have those have different priorities in the 3Ps?
Yeah. I think one way is structurally. So the La Casa board has 21 members. Most of them are elected officials, combination of county, local cities, big cities, smaller cities. And we also have what we refer to as experts, but they're non-elected people on the body, on this agency, which is relatively new and different. And we are really working to create a different culture and environment for this agency, which is really tough when being a person of imagination and working with people with imagination, and then we get to deal with the lawyers that are like, this is how we've done it before. And we're like, yeah, but this is now how we want to do it going forward. So being able to have and really work with advocates and having them at the table, at the decision-making table, is a game changer for La Casa and here in the region for Los Angeles. And having the combination of cities, you know, the attention gets placed on city of LA. We're here in Long Beach. And then we have the rest of our 86 cities. And having them at the table as well is really critical to the conversation and being able to have all of them. The agency, the board started meeting in April, and we've focused on collective learning. And it's taken a lot of patience because folks want to see action, but we're also setting up the infrastructure for when the resources come and become available. We're ready to really deploy and be able to have the ability to demonstrate the projects. So being able to have the whole range of people at the table, being able to talk about and learn together has been, I think, a unique experience for some of our elected officials who are not used to being in these kind of sessions. And thankfully, Supervisor Mitchell is a leader that really believes in new experiences, even in government agencies. So I think that this is a really exciting experiment for us here in the region to have a new agency and trying to really set it up where we're blending experiences from the movement building space to practitioner space to government space. And I'm really excited to really see what we can come up with in regards to these diversity of tools and being able to have a funding source that is not time-bound. The initiative that folks are gathering signatures for, that we'll have in November, that'll be a game changer, right? To not have to come back every 5-10 years to have these resources and have consistency and certainty of funding is really critical. And I think that's what's really been able to bring us all together. And hopefully we'll bring a few of the skeptics along the way. I'm sure they'll be at the table once we have the money, but we will keep working. So we're working really hard right now with coalition partners, with the board, to set up the policies and the programs that are really going to position the entire LA County and the region to be able to leverage and harness the government dollars. And I'm going to put out this invitation for our finance and private funding. You know, we focus a lot, all of us are focused, that those $18 billion are not going to come exclusively from government. They're not going to come exclusively from taxpayer dollars. We need the private capital to also come to the table and give on your interest, on your patience, on what you expect from our development partners, and the returns that might need to be modified in order to really achieve harnessing and getting to the scope and scale that we know we all need across the state to make that happen. So I put that challenge out there for those of you that need to talk to your higher ups on the private capital, that we really also need you all to reevaluate your policies, to reevaluate what restrictions you have and what changes need to happen. Clearly you have people up here that are ready to make whatever law changes are needed, but sometimes it's not laws, it's the internal policies within those companies that need to change. So we're doing our part on the government side to create the products to unlock and be able to leverage, and we need the private capital to join us in this work and really to make that happen.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm going to start wrapping us up here, and I'm going to invite you, Sabrina, to share with us some of your thoughts. You laid out some hard truths about the backlash and the scary possibility of having a Prop 13 that's stronger and fiercer than ever, and making it even more difficult than currently is to raise new revenues. But what opportunities do you see for us to break through together, to connect the dots between the housing sector, which is often working on its own, and you're not coming from the housing sector, you're coming from the progressive movements and tax reform, history of tax reform efforts. So how do you see those opportunities of connecting the dots?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we do have to connect the dots, so we have to work to build broader coalitions, bigger tents, really build alignment. A lot of the work that we do, we work with a statewide alliance of 9 state and regional community networks representing 130 local groups in 28 counties of the state. We've been working to really build alignment around long-term structural reforms and a long-term agenda. And so at the heart of that is progressive revenue and taxation, because having the resources to fund our future allows us to create thriving, healthy communities that we need and deserve. We're also focused on housing, right? Because of the existential threat, the crisis, the impact that it's having on our communities. And so I do feel like there is more excitement, energy, and understanding that we all have to harness our collective efforts to address the housing crisis. We need to be creative. We need to think about how do we connect the dots and align our movements. And all the things that we've been talking about in terms of shaping the story, like telling a new story about the role of government, inspiring hope to cut through the cynicism, the pessimism, and the anxiety that people feel. And then the work that we do is to expand the electorate. We actually do engaging we just had an election, the ballots are still being tallied. Folks are projecting that it'll be one of the lowest turnouts for a presidential primary in California's history, and we know that when turnout is low, who lives in California is not shaping policies and electing leaders. And so we do the work to target folks who typically stay home on election day or are overlooked by campaigns, both during elections and in between. And with our partners, we plan to mobilize 500,000 voters this November. The other thing I just want to say is that I am so impressed by the scale and breadth of this network. There's 2,500 people here at this conference. All of you have staff, you have organizations, you have boards, you have clients, you have coalition partners, you have members, you have family members, you have neighbors. Can you imagine if this room harnessed your collective power and threw down to pass ACA 1 this November? The reach certainly is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And remember, Prop 15 lost by just 670,000 votes. And if we harness the power of the housing movement with racial justice, climate justice, and social justice movements, and all threw down together to pass schools and communities first in 2026, we'd raise another $18 billion for housing, for schools, for local safety net and other services. So this is the kind of power that we can build, and this is the kind of power that we must build if we want to win structural reform.
So this panel really has been intended to be, in some ways, a landscape understanding of what's possible and what breakthroughs are already happening and on their way, and also a call to action. So we've heard some calls to action about rooting it in the stories and real lived experiences of different kinds of people across the state. We heard a call to action about the role of private capital, partnering with government, partnering with community in order to reach that goal of $18 billion for housing. We've heard that we need to build our attent. That's not just about the multitude of interests in the housing sector, but to connect the dots with climate and racial justice efforts and others. And to not just think about it as a housing bond or a housing only initiative, but to think about structural reform of our entire tax system, a la Prop 13 reform. Amy, I know you are waiting to say to this room what else they can do. So I'm going to leave you with the last word. What can we be doing, those of us in this room and the relationships that Sabrina laid out that we have beyond this room, what should we be doing over the next few months?
Thank you. Thank you all. It's, again, so inspiring to be amongst you all and speaking to this. It's a complicated landscape, and it's a long road to November. But if all goes well, and imagine we're on the ballot, we need 50% plus one to win. Schools and Communities First lost by 670,000 votes, as Sabrina said. And we actually, if you just take affordable housing residents in California, it's something like 2 million voters. 2 million people, it may not be voters, it may just be people, but it's, we can get to scale even in our own community. And if you add in the tens of thousands of staff members, the huge networks that we wield, we can have a deep and profound reach that can be the difference maker in a close campaign and can be the difference maker when we need to build momentum and build hope for solutions. So, in the middle of your table is this thing with the QR code. Everybody pick it up or lift it up if you have one in front of you. Go to this thingy. You put your phone on it for us like older, not technologically advanced people. It's miraculous. It will open up a link, and then if you go to the link, please sign up. If you want to be old school or you just want to connect with people or get more information, please go to the table that's in the front lobby by the registration table. We have a lot more information about ACA 1 that you can take. This is together what we need to do to make 2024 the year of housing. So it's going to take all of you signing up, getting all of the people you know to sign up to get involved. It's going to take raising a lot of money. So whether you can, your organization can, or you can help with figuring out how we are going to raise $40 to $50 million to win this effort, we need all of you. If you can bring in additional networks and contacts, that's what we need. But campaigns are participatory by their very nature. They get us to reach, millions and millions of people that there's no other time, and we have no other vehicle to have the kind of reach with our message. Sorry about that. Other than in these kinds of campaigns. So to take advantage of that. And I want to give you a few more things just before I pass it back to you, Jennifer. So the state campaign coalition is called Californians for Affordable Housing Now. Make sure you do the QR code or go to the table and sign yourself up to be part of that network. If you're in the Bay Area, join the Bay Area Housing for All Coalition that's working to pass the 9-county $10 to $20 billion measure. And if you're in the Bay Area, go and look out for Begins with Home. That is our Hearts and Minds narrative campaign to seed the ground and help people visualize what's possible before them. So take a look at those things. Take a look at what's happening all over the state in these different initiatives. Join the effort to fight against the Taxpayer Deception Act. This is the time. It feels heavy. It feels weighty because it is. And sometimes in these moments of big threats and big risk come big opportunity. And so in this moment, let's make it happen where we see through this opportunity and fight against the risk.
Woo. All right. So you have your marching orders. You know that it's not just these fine people up here who are responsible for seeing us into the future. It's all of us doing our part, whether it's with our families, friends, networks, organizations, donating, signing up, voting, volunteering, getting connected. And I have to say, I was feeling a little tired when I walked up on the stage, but being in community like this, I'm energized and hopeful and renewed. So thank you so much. Please help me thank our panelists for the amazing work that they do, for helping us have new hope. Thank you to Merritt Community Capital Corporation for serving as the title sponsor for this session, and thank you for the donations you're making into these campaigns
and the risk that you are taking along with others like CZI to make all of this happen. And we look forward to seeing you at the welcome reception at the Terrace Theater Plaza, right outside and up the stairs. Thank you all. Have a great day and a great evening.